No, I didn't know anything.
That's somebody whose jacket that was. That's the roving line, yes. Any idea whose jacket this is? Oh no, wasn't it? Well, just offer it around. See if you get off. Oh, I know. Is it Nick? Oh no, because he's just like the building and shutting it down. Oh yeah. What size is it? If it's my size, do you have to switch this on? Yes, you do. I do. Oh no, it's on. Hello. 1, 2, 1, 2. Oh, that's it. Yeah, so whatever you'll see, what's that? So they'll hear what you're saying on the internet. I'm not saying you are. Anybody claim this? Ladies and gentlemen, we could start the afternoon session. My name is Guy Davies, I'm head of policy at SILIC, and I'm also part of the SUPL coalition, which includes the library campaign, Unison, Voices for the Libraries, and a number of individual campaigners who have organised this
conference. And the centrepiece of this conference was for you to have the opportunity to have a discussion with the new Leadership for Libraries Task Force, who've been in existence for about 8 or 9 months, about what they are doing, what they could do, what you hope them to do, and what you want them to achieve. Alan Gibbons was meant to have chaired this session. I cannot replace Alan Gibbons, but he does send his apologies. He's following George Osborne to China. What the Chinese will make that one, I don't know. But obviously, we wish him well. As I think you have been discussing in your groups this morning, you have been reminded that the task force resulted from the CHART report, the Independent Library Report in England, which was published last December. And amongst the many things in that report was it was he who coined the term Leadership for Libraries Task Force, and that in itself perhaps gives an indication of what he was hoping for the task force. And he also talked not only about concrete things, but he talked about reinvigorating the library service, even re-energizing was another term. So I think the aspirations and indeed our expectations are quite high, and it will be interesting to hear what in reality Cathy and Paul thinks the task force will be able to do. But we're very fortunate in having Paul Blanton, who is Chief Executive of Northamptonshire, but he's here today as Chair of the task force, and Cathy Settle, who I think originates from the government's digital service, but is here today as the new Chief Executive of the task force. We have been also blessed by a number of other people who have been task force members, and certainly Chiara from Devon is here. I think Neil's also engaged with it from Manchester, and of course Philip's Nick Poole has been a member. But I don't want to take more time. I simply really want to say thank you very much for coming to Paul and Cathy. Invite them to give a reasonably brief introduction, 15 minutes or so, and then it will be your turn, and we can have a discussion about the task force. So over to you, Paul. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. I'm going first, and then Paul follows. If we don't know, there's a TV screen down there, and we're on it. I'm watching myself on screen. So I thought it was just doing a bit of a recap about the Leadership for Libraries Task Force. I know that there was some information in the second session that you had, but we're just going into that in a bit more detail. So guys already talked about the fact that we were set up following William CHART's report. First meeting we had was in March, and we meet once every 2 months. The task force jointly reports both to the Department of Communities and Local Government on behalf of central government, and then the Local Government Association, particularly as we said before, because the local authorities actually run libraries. So we report both to central and local government. William, in his report, talked about the potential lifespan of the task force. He said probably a lifespan of 3 or 4 years. I say to everybody, if I could do myself out of the job in a year, I'd be thrilled. That'd be really good. We'll see where that goes. One of the things we have said at the end, towards the end of that time, though, is we will, as a group, discuss what items of work we've been working on which still need doing. So some stuff will probably, we might produce some documents, for example, that still need maintaining. There might still be some ongoing tasks after that. So one of the things we will do at the end of that is look at, is there any legacy work, is there any long-term work that then needs taking on by somebody else, and who should that be? So we'll make sure that our stuff doesn't just drop off at whatever time it is that we close. I asked in your sessions, I get a show of hands, I don't know, about what would success look like at the end of what we've done. Certainly, I think in our group, and in fact, probably every conversation I've had with people from libraries, there is absolutely no agreement whatsoever about what success would look like. It's not the problem. Everything from actually, it's really important that we've got a wide range of network community libraries that are near to where people live, so people find it easy to get to them, and accepting that actually the quality of the services in those libraries might decrease with funding cuts, but if that's a price we should pay. To no, let's have fewer, bigger libraries that have got better services. Let's focus all our efforts on those. From why don't we make sure that libraries are open for very long hours and then the community can visit them whenever they want, to actually know it's better if they only do a few days a week. So actually there are very, very different views. Interesting to know from all the groups that they will come out in the discussion about, did you have a consensus? Because if you did, that would be really helpful. But I somehow suspect you probably didn't. So in the absence of sort of agreed measures of success, the task force did make some decisions at the beginning about what we thought our priorities should be. They were on those slips, or highlighted them on the slips that you've got in the section before. I'll just sort of go through them each in turn so you're aware. So the first is about digital enablement. Certainly in our group it came up, and I'm sure in others, about the impact of the internet and digital services and what that means for libraries. Certainly in our group it was very clear that the role of libraries in terms of supporting people with access, if they haven't got a computer at home, about helping them with skills, if they haven't got the skills to be able to complete services by themselves, applying for jobs or whatever it might be. Libraries have got a really, really strong role there in digital literacy, actually in the same way as you had for literacy for hundreds of years, actually. So digital, I think, is a real sort of focus for us. There are some really basic things that we do need to deliver. So we have got, when we came in, about 2/3 of libraries had Wi-Fi, about a third didn't. Frankly, in this day and age, you expect to have Wi-Fi wherever you go now, in your local coffee shop or your train station or wherever. So getting Wi-Fi in libraries is really, really important. We did manage to secure the funding from the Treasury, the 7.4 million for that, which is great. And that money has now been allocated by Arts Council out to local authorities. And that gap will be filled by the end of March. So by the end of March, it's like 98–99% of libraries will have free Wi-Fi, which is brilliant. So that really sort of starts to bring us into the 21st century. We're also very mindful that some of the computer kit that's in libraries also isn't that great. Someone said earlier, actually, the People's Network went in and some people haven't really upgraded it since. So we are looking at opportunities to see what we can do about maybe upgrading equipment. Also looking at things like e-lending, for example. I know there were some pilots on remote e-lending that were carried out in 4 libraries, which completed earlier this year. So we've been talking to the publishers and others about how can we extend that now, how can we extend the offer that libraries have on e-lending. Again, it's part of that thing about showing the public that libraries are really fit for the 21st century. We're keeping up with the digital age. And so the first priority is digital. Second priority is what we commonly call libraries adding value, but it's really about reflecting that libraries support a whole range of different agendas. Obviously literacy, I've touched on digital literacy, but actually they do activities around health, about business and economic growth, about social inclusion. They do a whole range of activities. What's really clear when I go out talking to people is that most people nowadays don't know what libraries do. Frankly, the people in senior decision-making positions, many of them haven't been in a library in 20 years. I'm shocked sometimes about the lack of knowledge that's there. So actually, how do we do more about articulating that role that libraries play in communities, the different functions that they fulfill, the services that they provide? How do we make sure that people know about that, whether they're decision makers or users or non-users? And also, how do we look for opportunities to expand and build on some of those, actually? And there are some new opportunities. Third priority is about best practice. I have the joy of going around at least one day a fortnight to libraries around England, and I've been all over the place. And I've seen some great things that individual libraries are doing. But for all sorts of reasons, that isn't always shared. It's certainly not being replicated and adopted in other places around the country. So we're not capturing and making the most of that really good practice that's going on. So part of it is me going out and talking about what people are doing. But part of it is also looking at how can we share that material through some documents that we're currently producing. So we're producing one package of material which is aimed at local authority chief executives and for councillors like local portfolio holders. And in that we're talking about the sorts of options that are available to them and the sorts of good practice that we're seeing around the country. So really trying to open their eyes about what they could be doing. We'll also then be following on in the new year with some guidance also for communities and people who want to take on or have taken on the running of a library. So certainly it came up in my group about, you know, what makes a good volunteer-run library service. It would be really good if you could still articulate some of the things we do and how it might do it. So we'll be looking at trying to pull that together, as I say, starting in the new year. And so that's best practice. Fourth priority is workforce. And actually, whether that's professional librarians, and I know obviously it's something obviously Civic feel very strongly about, or whether it's volunteers, how do we ensure those people are trained, equipped, empowered to do what it is that we want them to do? So how do we help them build those skills and learning that they need? And then the fifth priority, and actually underpins them already, is probably the most important one, which is actually about communications and promotion. So actually, unfortunately, the media sort of narrative quite often about libraries is actually very negative. It's cuts and it's closures, and you know, not taking it away from the media, they're reporting what is going on. You know, a lot of that's factual. But sometimes that narrative becomes too dominant, and actually the positive things that libraries are doing, the way that they help and support and impact on society, those messages aren't coming through. We need a better balance, I think. So one of the people we've taken on, who you've met before, is Julia, sitting at the front there. And Julia is leading on working with all the task force member organisations to try and improve and change that communications narrative. So try and get that real positive push out about libraries and library staff and library workforce. So again, staff, we've talked about some of those that have gone along. We will be publishing those progress reports. We're just having conversations about the timing of when we do that. What we don't want to do is sort of a bit drown out and all the spending review noise that's going on at the moment. So we'll hopefully get that out very soon. That will cover, say, you know, a lot more detail, some of the stuff I've just described. I think the thing that, for me, I guess, is really, really important and why today is so helpful, I think, is, you know, in doing what we need to do, actually, you know, I recognise I'm certainly not the expert in this. You know, I've come fairly new to the libraries world. Actually, the experts are people sitting in this room and the people that are out there on the ground, day in, day out, running libraries. One of the reasons I go out and visit, but it's also one of the reasons I come to events like this, because I'm really keen to try and capture and build on your knowledge and expertise. So hopefully you've had your time in the workshop to feed in some views, but please do engage with us. We do have a range of, we've got blog, we've got social media channels. You know, for those of you who are into social media, that's great, engage with that. For those of you who can't, feel free to send in afterwards. You know, but please do make sure you're feeding in your views and your thoughts to us. I might come back at the end with just a few sort of controversial points, maybe just based on some of the discussion earlier. But do you want to say a few words?
Yes, thank you, Kathy, and I'm very, very glad to be here. I'm very sorry I wasn't here this morning. I had son come back from university and I thought I'd better see him for at least 2 hours before I come here. And then if you wonder why I'm dressed like this, I've got to go and entertain people at a rugby match this evening. This is the one chief executive. I just wanted to add, because Kathy's done a lot of the detail about what the task force is doing. If anybody thinks we're doing nothing, by the way, you should just look at the list of the agenda that we've got in the next 2 weeks. Because one of the most important things when I took over this role was the realization of a lot of fantastic work that is going on in libraries and the sheer ignorance by the stakeholders, including chief executives, which is why I have 3 chief executives on the task force, about what is going on. And if I'm talking predominantly as a chief executive in the next few minutes, I think there's some real realizations of the balances of the pressures that local government finds itself in. There is nobody yet who I have met, whether it's people who you think are anti-libraries, which I might add aren't when I talk to them, who has a philosophical bent to want to close libraries and destroy the library service. Quite the contrary, actually. Virtually everybody wants to think about how do they use them in a different way in the future. But you know, if you honestly want to know what the biggest pressure to the library service is, it's social care and children's safeguarding. That is the biggest demand on resources. And when people talk about graphs of doom and things like that, trust me, they are a reality in terms of balancing resources. And we'll get back onto libraries, but just to put it into real context, because I was talking to somebody at lunch. Take Northamptonshire. Everybody had to get their school admissions in if you wanted a school place by the 1st of September. We all know that's not all library says. Since the 1st of September in Northamptonshire, I've had an extra 2,041 by this Friday, extra people asked to find a school place. So if you think about the resources that have to go into that, an extra 20 primary schools and 5 secondary schools just by the end of this decade, the demand on services elsewhere. And when you sit there as politicians and advisors to those politicians, what the chief executive's role is, it is how do you balance all of these things? So part of what the task force role to do is to absolutely make it as easy as possible for two groups of decision makers to understand the value of libraries. One is the chief executives and local government portfolio holders, and Kathy talked about that advice and guidance we're trying to do. And we're trying to do that in a way that says, did you know all these things are going on in libraries? Did you know you can help with your prosperity agenda, your public health agenda, your literacy agenda, your schools agenda, etc., and the things again that many of you know. And by the way, this is how you do it, and this is who's doing it, and therefore it's very easy. And you make it in bite-sized chunks. People like me go, oh, I didn't know that, that's a good idea. Why don't you go and talk to them and they can help you? So there's that part of aligning the agenda with everything we're trying to achieve in the government. And the other thing that we've been spending a lot of time with, and I keep failing to get some meetings, but Kathy enough and William turns up to those, which is with virtually every government department. Prior to the spending review submissions, we've seen them all, from DFE to BIS, DCOG, and we're seeing this on Thursday, and so on and so forth, Department of Health, to get them to understand what is going on in libraries. The fact that you talk to Ian Duncan Smith and say, did you realise actually there's a huge number of staff out there in the communities who have digital skills. And by the way, did you know that people who come into libraries often need the help? They're the 20% of the society who need the help. So do you know what, when you're trying to roll out universal credit, you've actually got localities in the right places, in the communities, who have those type of skills, you can help those people to do that. And you get them to think, oh right, there's a solution that libraries can play in me delivering my national agenda. So that alignment, and also, by the way, do you want to therefore put some of this in your spending review so that we try to spread the load rather than just going to the Department of Culture, Media and Sport and say it's your responsibility to pay for libraries. You get IDS thinking about it, and you get DFE thinking about it, you get Department of Health thinking about it, etc. So that they all start to put in. That's what we've been doing very actively over the last 6 months, because there's that one opportunity. Now, of course, the success of that, A, will be very difficult to measure, because they didn't know what they were going to do anyway, and B, as any of you who've ever looked at public sector finances when you're funding all that, trying to understand the detail from the devil is remarkably difficult to know. But they have given us significant audience, and most importantly, they've actually asked us to go away and do some homework and come back with proposals, which I think is also important. So, and by the way, can you go and talk to those civil servants? The other thing we've also been doing on your behalf, and I have to say a really important thing as well, the members of the task force, when I talk about the task force, I'm also talking about the fantastic work that's done by the likes of SCL and CIP and others. You know, this is about collecting people that we bring together and to give voice. The other thing is about looking at different sort of funding type solutions. So we've been going out talking to the foundations and saying, well, actually, you know, what's your role as foundations in terms of philanthropic lending into sector? How about moving into some of the things that we're trying to do in local government, and how do you want to support libraries in that? And so, you know, and we met with all the sort of London-based foundations. So those type of things are absolutely critical. The other thing we have been at is our listening to yourselves, and again, Kathy in particular is going around both around libraries, listening to campaign groups, and getting that feel for the future of where libraries are. I'm absolutely conscious we want to listen to you, but aligning those agendas. The other thing that's really, I think, really important, which Kathy said, but I'm very important, is to get that positive narrative. It's very easy to say, oh, you know, you look not I'm doing that and this, and you're not hearing anything here, or by the way, they're trying to do that, as opposed to this constant reinforcement of why libraries add so much value to their communities. Not why a building adds so much community, but why a library adds so much to the community. Sometimes it's the building as well. And this is the real role it can play in the future, and this is that positive narrative, because otherwise it does become a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I can tell you as well, you know, how it works. If you're a politician and everybody else is doing something, and there's a whole lot of noise about it, do you know what? It's easy for you to get on that bandwagon. Because do you know what? There's so much noise that's going on. So they're shutting, or they're doing community, or they're doing voluntary. So why don't we do that now? You know, they'll turn around to the chief executive. Is that easier than stopping gritting the roads? They're the type of choices they have to make. So if there's a more positive narrative about what's going on in libraries, then they'll be saying, you know, well, let's do that, because what I'm hearing over there, there's real value over there. So it's really, really important in times of difficulty to maintain a positive narrative. The other thing, the final point I want to make, I literally, again, with my chief executive's hat on, spend a lot of time talking about no money in one form or another compared to the demands on us. And, you know, looking at Northamptonshire alone, you know, the LGA will say we're the worst funded council in the country, which I probably concur at. But when you talk to government, and I talk to government with that hat on, you know, to Treasury officials, to DCLG officials, etc., and permanent secretaries about what you do. The types of agenda they're talking about are locally now dressed up as devolution. Okay, so devolution, combine your authorities. That is the game in town. You know, we can talk about, well, how do we, you know, some great creative ideas. You know, Nick's had about, you know, pulling library services out and running them as national library services. They are great ideas, but they are not remotely on the main policy decision makers' agendas. So what we absolutely have to do is to think about, well, if there are combined authorities agendas going on, how are you talking to the influencers and decision makers, as we're trying to do, and say, well, how can libraries play a role in that? How can libraries play a role with continuing movement of personal responsibility in health, you know, personal responsibility, system authority, the Simon Stevens model, and you know, get involved in those really, really key policy decision makers and make sure that we're aligning libraries to that agenda. Because if you don't, you won't be able to sort of rise out of that sort of feelings of what is going on, massive changes going on in the and to come out with a really bright, defined future for what libraries are. And that is, as I say, that is why the task force did recommend the need for national framework for inverted commas, which we're hoping that the LGA and government ministers will accept, because it then gives the ability to give context that new sort of future and what we expect libraries to be in delivering those government agendas moving forward. But if we ignore them, then we ignore them at our peril. If we fight them, I said to ASCL yesterday when I spoke to them, I once wrote an MBA thesis, which was entitled From Terrorist to Ambassador, because I realised that fighting the system, which actually, you know, thinking about yesterday, probably not a good thing to mention today, so I take that back, but I'm very glad that Nick actually silence this morning, just on Twitter. But that aside, the concept of there, one you know, fighting system is not a thing that the task force will overtly do, because if they seem to fight the hands that put us in place, then eventually we won't get there. That doesn't mean to say, when we're sat there with Ed Vasey in the House of Commons selling up tea or whatever, we are not making the very points that you very clearly and loudly make to us. But you do that in some cases in a role we play behind the closed doors and leave other people who can have a more vocal voice to have that voice more vocally. So we do listen to you, and we do make sure that those points are got across on your behalf. And I think on that, that's a good place to open up for debate.
Okay, thank you very much, Paul. Thank you very much. What I want to do now is to open this up to you. And in fairness, I think we should address the two questions that you gave to us, but we will do that towards the end as we come to a conclusion, because it seems right to so Cathy and pull away with our ideas as to what the overall success should be, what we should achieve, and the priorities in getting to that. But right now, your questions, please. Yes.
We're not sure if is this working?
Yeah.
No, it wasn't before.
Yeah.
Just about the point you make about opening it up for discussion, I just want to refer back to one of the last phrases, behind closed doors. There's a contradiction there.
Okay, well, I can be very, very plain about that. So first of all, be really clear, the task force itself is absolutely transparent. That's why we publish all our minutes, etc., and we will continue to do that. But I think we're all realistic in all forms of our life. You know, it's talking to your children. When there's times we have to have discussions, they're more powerfully had if they're had in private. But when what you make sure is that if that isn't working, you raise that and make it more public. But I think that's true of life in general. But we are, you know, as a task force, we are absolutely open and transparent. But I think there's, you know, again, well, anybody who knows me, and I've been to it, will realise that, you know, what I don't do is, I could sit here and spin it all and say, oh no, we do all that and we do that. But actually, I also talk about the realities of life, what it's like to actually take a chief executive. And I am sitting there deciding on, you know, do I recommend that we stop quitting roads, or do I recommend that we do X? I'm not going to stop quitting roads for obvious reasons, corporate manslaughter for one. But you know, they are the types of decisions. They are the types of decisions that people have to take. But there are times, you know, if you want to influence people, embarrassing people in public doesn't necessarily get them to do what you want.
It's not in public. There should be a public presence.
Okay, perhaps if we can take 2 or 3 questions and therefore allow more people a voice and get the responses.
Alan Wiley, Voices from the Library. It's quite a fundamental question, really. Workshop that we had this morning, and that is, why should we as public library users, workers, campaigners, and union members have faith in a task force that's keen to explore alternative learning models? And then you as chair, with your record of outsourcing public services.
Okay.
Can we take a couple? A couple more. I mean, I know that's fine. There's one.
Why should I, as an individual, carry on paying council tax, income tax, VAT, if actually I'm getting people on the speaking as a retired pension, we still pay tax on the pension. All I see is people saying you're going to have to cut these cuts, I'm going to cut this, cut that. No one's cutting my expenses, no one's cutting my energy bill, you know, and this is across all public services. And it's looking incredibly bleak. And all you hear from people is, oh, we're going to cut and you're going to have to manage. I don't know how much more some of the people I'm speaking to in the room can take. You know, there won't be any of them.
One more, then we'll ask the panel.
Well, I can do 3, but I'm going to go for 3. Thanks. I was, for my sins, a councillor in Hinkley Hospital until May. You're right, we do have to take very tough decisions. But I guess I wish the task force well, we need to do well. But I guess the concern I have is that there's no real challenging, and maybe it's because you're not wanting to do it so fair enough, but of the shrinking of the state agenda, which includes the wanting to outsource libraries, and really, if you're not prepared to, in any sense at all, challenge that agenda, then kind of what's the point of it?
Okay, I mean, I think they all came from a similar place.
Yeah, okay, well, if I start, first of all, be really clear that I mean, because I'm referring to the second question. I'm unfortunately not the Prime Minister, nor am I a politician. So asking agendas in terms of getting national debt under control and how we want to make sure we've got proper exchange rate mechanisms, whether in Europe and things like that, let alone the cuts agenda, is not a thing I generally, I'm simply not, I can have my personal views on that, but probably not when I'm being filmed. I am by definition apolitical. But I think it is an interesting one. It goes back to this narrative. You know, you talk about cuts. I mean, you know, and trust me, I've taken out 150 million. I've got another 150 million, 200 million, 150 to go. And yet, at the same time, my libraries now are all open at least 6 days a week, and they're all open at least until, you know, for family-friendly hours and homework time. So actually, to me, it shouldn't be a narrative about cut. It's about how do we do things differently and how do we innovate. And what we're also not, which I'm sort of linking onto the new models, what we're also not is each of the 151 library authorities, which under, you know, our constitution are democratically elected in order to take decisions about their communities. So if they choose to do different models, what our role is in the task force is to point out the advantages, the disadvantages, the hows and the how not. And, you know, it might be through the framework, we also say that certain things that the state has recognised, for example, under the 1964 Act, completely sort of, it's over to you type libraries, for example, in the community. So, but at the moment, what we have to do is give people real knowledge about the pros and cons of doing those things, because often a lot of it is people are reinventing the wheel, they're trying things because they hear it somewhere else, and you end up with a result that may or may not be the optimal result for that locality and that community, let alone for the nation's library service. So I think it's really important that we do play that role in looking at what best practice looks like. In terms of the personal one about the outsourcing, me being chair, again, I love the way media report things as opposed to how I actually do things. My libraries, for example, are moving in quite openly. This was a decision taken only last week by my cabinet as part of a community interest company. But that community interest company is an entirely state-owned company between myself as a 51% guarantor, the NHS as a 38% guarantor, and the University of Northampton as 11% guarantor. These are around really putting in place a dedicated prevention and community service to make sure that we've got the well-being sustainability of the communities put in place. I'm not outsourcing it. I do outsource things like highways, but then tell me a councillor pretty much doesn't do highways and bin collection, etc. by contract. So, so it is a myth, Alan, is what I'm trying to say in terms of the fact that I outsource everything. I have a new model for local government because actually I'm realistic to know the way it exists now cannot exist in the future, given the demands on it versus the amount of money it has. So I think they have to do that. I think I've answered. Oh, then you know, why the task force itself? Again, you know, one, if you're not actually going to make the challenges, well, first of all, we do make the challenge, but we do that by, as I say, trying to say to people, did you know how this can add to your agenda? There's that challenge of the sheer ignorance challenge, which I think is a really important decision making. The second thing is, and again, without being any less blunt than this, if you didn't have the task force, and trust me, the amount of time and effort, not only people sat here, but also people like Kira and Nick in the background, have coordinating a voice for libraries with William, who's also always there in the background helping open doors for us, then you'd have one less significant tank in your armory. I mean, it's as blunt as that. So, you know, we do a lot to make sure the agenda is up there, that the arguments are made, and that the people who need to be influenced are being influenced. So, you know, I suppose judges, you know, as I say, constantly judges when we do the public reports every 6 months, and then judge whether we are making a difference. The other thing I have to do that we do silently in the background again, so I probably didn't mention it, when there is a library service in the headlines, you know, we are picking up the phone and going to see them and to talk to them and to see if we can help them. And again, you don't need to tell you which library services they are. The same as those libraries who, there's only 3 of them, who decided perhaps the Wi-Fi offer wasn't for them. I personally picked up the phone to each of the chief executive, and miraculously all three of those are now taking the Wi-Fi offer. Mainly again because they didn't realise they hadn't even put in the Wi-Fi at the time, which is a different issue. So there was a lot of work that goes on in the background, making those subtly persuading decision makers.
I think Paul's answered most of it actually. There's one sort of related issue which is probably worth mentioning as well that we're focusing on. I think one of the most shocking things I found when I came into this job, actually, I've spoken about this before, is with the lack of data that was available. Even at a local level, within an individual, library or local authority, it is extremely difficult for them to get a view about what's going on in their library. From as much as we have one system that manages physical books, and one that manages e-books, and one that manages audio books, and one that manages e-magazines, and so even just trying to see what's Mrs. Smith looking at. You have to go to about 5 different systems to get a view of one user and what they're doing. So without that data, it makes it very hard to think about how do you provide a better service to Mrs. Smith and how do you target things at her because of what she's interested in, what she's reading at, for example. If that's difficult at a local level, you've then got an even worse problem when you then try and go to a national level and say, well, what's the bigger picture here, what's going on? Many of these technology systems unfortunately don't talk to each other. So you can't actually easily amalgamate and automate amalgamation of data up to the national level. Why is that important? Well, of course, how on earth is anybody supposed to provide a well-informed service, and how you're supposed to make good decisions, and how you're supposed to improve the service if you actually don't know what's going on? So that is something that we're really keen to try and to do something about. And my other reflection on data and some of the problems now. The data, when it does come out, particularly those of you who are advocates of CIPRA data, by the time it's issued, it's about 8 months after the cause. Well, again, as Paul's already described, the world's moved on in that time. The one really great thing, I think, my time in the government digital service that we did was actually create what we call a performance platform with data about all government services. If you want to look up, if you go to gov.uk/performance, you can have a look at real-time data about how services are performing, who's on them at any particular time, where are they up to in the stage of the process, where are they dropping off, where are they having problems. All that data is there, real-time available. That's how you manage a good service. That's how you improve your service. That's what we haven't got at the moment for libraries. So, 2 things we're supposed to be doing. The first one is acknowledging that there is some data out there, albeit it might not be great. So we're looking at how do we make more use of analysing that data, how do we use that to inform as much as possible what we're doing, how do we, for example, pick out those libraries that are still having increasing book issues or are still getting more visitors through the door or other such patterns, who are sort of booking the trend really, and let's pull them together, let's see what we can learn from them, what is it they're doing that maybe others aren't. So how do we make best use of existing data? And then the next thing is looking at the future. And I think really sitting down, we're doing this with in a wide workshop group, and we'll be inviting both people from the task force, but also people from libraries who are actually managing these services, and are more than welcome to talk about what data do we actually need in the future to manage our library service. What of that have we already got, and how do we make it more easily accessible and comparable and so on, and what are the gaps, and how do we fill those? Now, from my cost in the digital service, it takes time to fill those, but I think actually getting that data will be critical both for the decision makers that Paul's been describing, but also for many of you. That data will be able to give you information for you to then challenge your local authority about, well, why is it you're doing this and someone else is doing that? And so actually trying to put data into everybody's hands, you, the public, everybody, so that people can actually make a better informed decision when they do finally go to the election next and make a decision about whether they want to carry on with austerity or not.
Okay, some more questions, please. Thank you.
3 over here.
Right. And there's one up here as well.
Do you mind if I do them in the order I saw?
Yeah, okay, right, yeah, let's do that.
1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, sorry, 4, 5.
I'm just kind of positive about library campaign. You started out transparent. I just wondered, does that mean that management will return to routine?
take another couple and we'll.
Oh, hi. Hi, I'm Tim O'Dell from Lambeth. What you said at the beginning is that it's not true that people know what success looks like, and I really would like, I thought you were going to leave controversial stuff at the end, but because I want to disagree really, because up and down the country we've seen consultations of people when their libraries are threatened, and I think people know exactly what success looks like. I think what you're talking about is that politicians don't know what success like, and I think that success looks like, and I think that's a very different thing, because I think when you were set up, one of the things I thought, which was basically what William Seagull identified, was that he said that decisions around libraries were made by people in socio-economic groups A and B, and people for services used primarily by people in low socio-economic groups, i.e. the decision makers know nothing about the services that libraries actually provide for the people. And I think when he said that you should be talk about libraries leadership, that meant that you need to change the paradigm in which you're looking at, and stop just trying to talk about the influence, who you can influence around the different various bodies, and start to talk about the real issues, and that is that you can't be a leadership in libraries if you don't talk about the real fact that the network of libraries that have been built up over the last 100 years is being decimated at the moment. It's absolutely being smashed, and that's the actual crucial leadership issue you need to be taking up.
One more.
One of the big said, Gary, and I'll come down there for the next round.
The dispute for libraries conferences have been going on for a few years now. One thing that has cropped up time and time again is that there's a need to actually reintroduce national library standards and also technical IT 64. And I think the libraries task force are in an ideal position to do that. So I make that one of your
Okay, well, there are three quite challenging questions there.
So on the, I'll take the last one first about strengthening the act. What the task force can and does do is provide recommendations to central government and to local government. So certainly, as Paul's already mentioned, one of the discussions we had in the task force, second meeting I think it was about this need for some sort of framework at a national level. Now, when we had that discussion, there was quite a bit of debate about actually should we look to try and push for the Act to be reopened, if you like, and debated. There was a real mix of views on that in the room, actually. Some people are saying, yes, absolutely, we should look to try and strengthen it. Some people say, actually, if you open the door, we're worried that actually we'll go backwards, not forwards. It'll actually get weaker rather than stronger, just because of the political climate that has already been described and the whole thing about localism and so on. So with this government and its views and policies, actually, you might not necessarily get the sort of outcome you were after. So, the collective decision when we had that discussion was that we shouldn't push for reopening the Act. What we should do is make sure that people are aware of what the Act actually said and ensure that, as Paul said, that people are aware about the options that are available to them and the pros and the cons and the benefits and so on. Now, I'm not saying that, that might not change. We, the task force, and actually DCMS, actually, are always constantly monitoring all sorts of bits of policies and legislations, and it may come a top point in, years to come where actually they change their mind and think actually it probably is time to reopen the Act. The same with the collective decisions we had at that time was that we wouldn't push for it. National library standards, again, is something that people have pushed for, being reintroduced, and we're constantly reminded that obviously we've still got them in Wales. I think even the people I've spoken to there, they say, whilst they do help, they're still widely open to interpretation, and they're not necessarily as clear cut sometimes as people would hope. Again, I go back to this current government, which the public have elected, is very much on an agenda of localism and devolution. It is not in the agenda of creating new library standards. Now, we can challenge that, and we do challenge that, but, I think, unfortunately, there is a political reality that that's what the politicians of the day have decided, and that's where they are on their agendas. So we can keep pushing and keep fighting, but I wouldn't expect to see any movement from ministers anytime soon, I think.
Yeah, and just to pick up on some of the other points, the interesting thing there as well, I might add, is that that's a huge voice you'll get from the local government. The LGA would no more want any form of national standard. They would resist it more than it would be imposed the other way, actually. Just to let you know the appetite from the local government decision makers. In terms of transparency and people sat around the task force in public, but the honest truth of that is no. And the reason it isn't an open public meeting is because predominantly it's people coming together with a huge agenda, which we whiz through, and we also then do sort of workshoppy things standing up. Now, I could have a lot more people on the task force, but given the size of the agenda, bluntly, it wouldn't work. It'd become an unwieldy business. What we absolutely do, as I say publicly, is record everything we've decided and minute everything we've done, and we make sure that that is available. Now, what we therefore do is make sure we come out to things like this and to listen to you. Now, hopefully, you'll see the visibility of the task force, and I know we do pretty much get around. It was quite funny. I nearly used this slide yesterday, and it's just a newsletter that goes around from the task force that Kathy does. It talks about all the things we're doing for the next 2 weeks, and it is constantly out there, either talking to somebody or talking to a group of sales at the last call yesterday, here today. Bear in mind that this is voluntary role for me, as it is for many of you volunteering in this room as well. So we do try and come out and have that dialogue outside. And bear in mind also, and this is a really important thing, we are a task and finish group. We were set up as a result of a recommendation on consultation, which was brought live by William and his team, and we have been tasked to implement those recommendations. So really, when we meet as a task force, we're meeting there as a programme group, saying the things that we're being asked to do, are we doing? Now, as we evolve over time, as we come out to look at some of the new things and where we'll go from year 1 to year 2 and 3, etc., we'll no doubt be consulting and ditto, in inverted commas, the framework, if that gets accepted. We then come out and make sure we're consulting on that as well. So we'll consult all the way when consulting is required. We're having lots and lots of people inside the task force meeting, which, trust me, is difficult enough to manage for a time. Given the size of the agenda, it's just something that won't work.
I'll just pick on one other point, which someone says about something like, I think I'm paraphrasing, got to acknowledge that libraries are being closed. Absolutely. We do that, right? We are. What's that? Decimated. I don't think they're going down to 1 in 10, so I think actually strictly it is true. But
estimation going to taking on the out of 10, and that is exactly what's that.
But certainly we have acknowledged that libraries are being closed and that hours are being reduced. We have made no secret of that. We've said it. I think Ed Baines even mentioned it in his speech of the day, and that acknowledgement about austerity and the impact of that. So that isn't something we're shying away from. All we're saying is we just need to make sure that the messages about that are being balanced by the positive messages about what libraries do as well. Otherwise, I think we're doing ourselves a great disservice.
Yeah, and again, I just really, really stress that the whole reason, the things we're talking about aligning with agendas, about putting positive messages, about making sure we're talking to funding sources, is absolutely because we, our whole raison d'etre is here to make sure we're reinvigorating and protecting the library service. All that protection means it's evolving into something right. So that's what I said, in terms of us all being on the same side, that is what we are trying to do. But we are not a lobby group, that is not what we are put in place to do. But what we are doing is doing a lot of those key messaging. And as I said, when it comes to places that are taking decisions that you, particularly in this room, will probably disagree with in terms of what they're doing with their libraries, that is where we are picking up the phone and talking straight to their chief executives, their senior portfolio holders. We're going to meet them, we're getting them to think, we're saying, look, have you thought about alternatives? So we are doing that. But again, we are not the local decision makers, so we can't, we've got to be really careful about what we do. We're there to support, we can't be there to challenge, and that is not our role. If the Secretary of State chooses to call something in, that is entirely a decision from him, and that be from his policy advisors in DCMS, not from the task force. Just need to be really clear about what we are as opposed to what they are.
Okay, some more questions. In the video.
This side one. They died to get to grade.
In terms of representation, can I explain the thinking behind the decision to not include the estimate on the large scale?
There's a gentleman here. So it is.
Yeah, as the panel putting into context this whole thing of libraries, in the libraries are keystone amenities for neighbourhoods and the district centre, and they have a crucial role in planning and creating sustainable settlements, and that we need to reinforce the message about the accessibility of the public to their branch libraries. And you mentioned before something about you didn't know which was the better model, or a larger number of branch libraries or more centralised libraries. I would say centralised libraries such as the amount of money that Birmingham spent is ridiculous. It's far better, as Michael Rosen would say, spending it on a greater number of libraries, so people have ready access to their libraries. And so that's the point really, better spatial distribution really, and that then brings us back to the criterion, not the standard, the criterion of the Bloodillion report of the mile travelled, not as Chipra would imply, straight line distance, but the mile travelled, which is 1,200 metres.
Can you start?
Sorry, there was one up here. Do you want to take that one?
Yeah, okay. They're so separate, they get answered separately.
You can go on if you want.
Go on.
Hi, I'm Ruth from Lambeth, where 50% of our libraries are basically closed. So the first question is, have you picked up the phone and are you going to see us? But I have more general ones too. On the thing about what would success look like, and you said that there's a lot of disagreements there. I think that's a bit disingenuous, because you said, like, should there be more libraries or better libraries? Should there be more opening hours or more staff? Should you use services in order to extend opening hours? I think what we all agree is that all communities should have a local library, and there should be more libraries and better libraries, and they should have longer opening hours, and they should have staff, and they should have all of the services. And you might say, well, that choices have to be made, but that doesn't mean that we don't know what success looks like. That means you're telling us we can't have success, which is very I personally like to see something that says what everybody in this country has a right to access. What books they have a right to access, what services they have a right to access, and how easily they have a right to access them, and what we should be doing to make sure that everyone can get that. And you said you're not politicians, so you can't turn that austerity for us, but I think you have to do your job as a library task force and say this is what people should have, and let the politicians explain why they won't have it. The other thing I wanted to say was about the role of libraries filling other agendas. I think that's absolutely true. The role that we play a role in education, in business, in health, we play all of those roles. But I think it's very important not to confuse the role we play in filling those agendas with just lumping other stuff into our services and expanding it. Oh, because I think if we lose our identity as libraries, we lose something quite special. We lose the relationship we have with our communities that other services don't have. That people trust us and they like us and they don't see us as another bit of the state, which is trying to take fines off them or might report them to somewhere or whatever. Or we need to keep that identity. And the other thing is that we don't want to be taking on things that leave us overstretched and we fail in both our agenda and theirs. And I had a memory of Northamptonshire which said it, and actually it's particular where that's trying to have a number of directly employed staff. But when I was researching it, I found this article, libraries in Northamptonshire lack space, facilities, staff, volunteers and expertise for under fire sessions. And that is an example of a service that took on somebody else's work and failed to fulfill it, and thus failed the library service, but also failed in its expansion of services. We don't want to do more but worse.
Okay, thanks, Joe.
Okay, some very, very fair points there. The last one, however, complete rubbish. And by the way, well, we won't say that word, that person who read that before works these days. That was absolute rubbish. Okay, so I love when things get quoted as Northamptonshire as opposed to the past. So, it's not rubbish. Guys, let's not be Northamptonshire. Can I just say, the judge of whether those things work or not is done by the regulators. But in terms of nobody, there was a motive behind that before. That's all I'll say, as opposed to why it's done. There's a really important point that's being made here, and I think that one is that the task force, the whole essence of what libraries are, about trusted space, neutral to everyone, where people go as citizens, not consumers, and all these other words that many of you can articulate in wax lyrical even better than I can, must never be damaged in the journey moving forward. And I completely and utterly concur with that. And in fact, we did meet the schools minister in one of our meetings, and his picture actually of what he thought we were describing when we were talking about community hubs was an interpretation of exactly that, where basically it was people queuing outside to do X or Y, and that wasn't what a library was about, before we then translated what we really meant by that. And when I talk about aligning libraries to the agenda, I don't mean therefore stop what you are as a library. It's a place where knowledge and potential is realised and fulfilled and started. And by the way, you're going to do something different, because that's a simple way of avoiding costs or raising revenues. It's about making sure that people understand that actually you can play a real role as a community hub in that agenda to help with people's prosperity who can't get jobs in that local community. And the other point that the gentleman raised about accessibility, again, I looked at, say not talking about Northamptonshire, where I looked and I saw who wanted face-to-face and how they could access and where my libraries were located in respect to that. Now, if you look at the geography of England and the way it's changing, you have to ask yourself, in every place, do I need the libraries I need in the place I need them? And if I do, because I've got remote communities and they have no way of accessing any other libraries, or there's no public transport for that particular area, or there's a more vulnerable group, vulnerable community there, then that's where you think about where you have your libraries in the most appropriate place. However, what you also do, as with all other assets, is start to think about, is that the right place? And actually, now that community is grown over there, do I need to put more focus in having a library here than a library there? So I don't think about, just because one is where it is now, doesn't mean to say it should be where it should be. But they should absolutely be tailored around the offer for the community, because that is what they are. They are a community asset for people to access a safe and trusted space. And if we jeopardise that and they're seen as something else, then we'll all fail, let alone the task force. So, I mean, I am absolutely concurring with some of the things that have been said there. I don't know, I spoke to Lambert. I will make a commitment. You've been to Lambert, okay, so we'll make a commitment if we haven't to talk to Lambert. Why not Unison? For the same reason, I suppose, in some ways, I have to make sure I get representative unions, and again, bluntly, we're Task and Finish Group. As we are doing here, we are more than happy to talk to Unison as I do, again, locally. So I don't have unions on, but not because I'm anti-union. The task force isn't. This goes back to the fact that we've got something to deliver. The consultation, including consultations with unions, was what William did in his work, and then said, these are the things that need to be delivered, please, and we were set up to do the delivery. But I'm very happy, always very happy to have that open dialogue with the unions.
Okay, any more? Sorry,
And I think the point about the success thing, take the point. I think, I guess all of us in this room, and certainly including myself, absolutely would describe to the model of success that you outlined, you know, with the people, with the places and all the rest of it. Fully support that. I guess what we're having to also deal with is then the sort of scenario that Paul outlined when we talked to local authority chief executives about, we'd all love to do that, but we haven't got the money, and therefore what do we do? So I guess we're having to add an element of sort of realism to that, which is, you know, how can you get as close to that as possible, I suppose, is what I would say. And, you know, that does mean having some trade-offs in some cases, which, you know, I can't say I'm particularly thrilled about, I can't say the people who are making decisions are either. But what we want to do is when people are, make sure that people who are making those decisions have the most information that they can, the most informed information that they can, so they make the best decisions for their communities. You know, that probably isn't going to be the decision that any of us would want, but you know, that's the decision that they're having to make. I fully support the point Paul made about not losing the identity of libraries. You know, I think frankly the reputation that libraries have got is almost sort of second to none. There are so many organisations I can think of that would kill for the sort of reputation actually that libraries have, the trust, the safeness, the security. You know, it's a brilliant reputation. And certainly we're very careful, you know, when we're out talking to potential partners or people who are interested in partnering with us in some way, in making sure that, you know, they're not going to sort of damage the brand in any way. I think, you know, we're really keen about that. I think also the point you made about, you know, if we are looking at bringing new services into the library, whether it's like work that library staff will do, or actually it's just bringing in another organisation to have a space in a library building. You know, we're always very clear in those conversations that if it's more work for library staff, then, you know, actually that needs funding. You can't just get that for free. So we're very clear on that. And where it's when it's another organisation who's coming in to take some space in the building, again, it's, you know, firstly you need to pay for that space because it's valuable space. But also, you know, how does their brand and reputation and values fit in with what it is that we think people are expecting when they go into a library space? So we're very keen not to lose that identity.
Could I add on to what you were saying, and extend an invitation for you to visit North Yorkshire as well. The libraries there over a very disparate region, the majority of them are proposed to become community-led. My contention would be each library should really retain a core staff member to be able to train the volunteers and to be there, because you know that they have that obligation. We're under serious threat where I am. You know, we have a core staff. Between the three of us, we have 100 years of experience. That seems to count for nothing. It counts for everything in our community. The media has reflected the circumstances there very positively. Volunteers have saved the library, but they're only in 2 afternoons a week. We are working on a level comparable to designated libraries that are core or hybrid libraries that will have paid staff. Reduced staff, they will have core staff there. Unfortunately, because of our proximity to a main branch, I think we've been actually tiered with the lowest performing libraries, even though statistically we're in the top 10. We've been allocated 3 to 5 hours a week for staff support. And that staff support isn't necessarily going to be on the ground. It could be from remote access. I think what works for certain models, very small libraries could work brilliantly, community run. The kind of scenario I'm suggesting is an expanding region. It is very unfair to expect the community to take on that kind of business with the same level of professionalism and success that we have delivered and continue to deliver under great duress. And we are under pressure to remain neutral and not speak a word to people. We had our 50th anniversary. There was no mention of that in the press. The people above us have failed. They admitted their mistakes the last time. In my opinion, they continue to make these mistakes. They made it initially in 2 afternoons a week when they introduced volunteers. The staff on the ground were informed to have no contact with those volunteers. That was a complete failure. Because my SSDA, my supervisor who's been there 40 years, I wish she could have been here today, because their experience is second to none. The life has been at branch. People there love her, the old people. Statistically, we are up on every level except with the officers complain because our only low performance is the machines. The machines are down. We have to bring up the machine percentage. But actually it tells a story. Because why is every other statistic up, but the machines statistic is down? They don't see the correlation between we're providing an excellent job where we are. Also, the facility is such, it would be a perfect location to train people, because everything is to hand. The main branch, you have to walk half a mile sometimes to find that reserved book. It's not the best situation to train people.
I'm sorry, you are, and giving you quite a bit of time, I think, and there are other stories of a similar nature. Yeah, Alan, would you like to? Andrew, sorry, not me.
Hi, I'm slightly concerned where the conversation here is going. I thought the task force, we don't seem to be moving very far forward. We seem to be pushing down the volunteer line, and I'd like to understand what sort of support you think and where you think volunteers fit within libraries.
Yes, okay, one more.
Just very briefly, because I don't want to ask a question. One brief question. The brief point is that the company, you made an aside earlier on, which the company commented on, which didn't need to be, which was about the people who voted this company. I'm just reminded that a minority of the people who voted this government, a majority, I think you probably better say, all the different other parties voted for anti-austerity parties in the task force should remember that. And the slightly less frivolous question is, when you go visit libraries across the country, which is fantastic that you're doing, would it be possible, and I appreciate you'd have to plan for it, because government diaries are no very busy, but to take this to phasing, maybe Mr. Wissendale and maybe even Peter Morgan and the near me in Leicestershire with you, because there's a number of discussions that I've had to take with folks here, is that if only these non-elected representatives, which I want, would get into libraries and just stand and see the kids over there, the parents over there, the people looking for jobs over here, then surely to goodness, even they would maybe change their mind.
I'll start with that last one. Absolutely agree in terms of ministerial visits. We have had Ed out at, I think, 3 libraries, 2 or 3 libraries in the last few months, and we intend to carry on taking him into those. Also, as Paul's already outlined, we spoke to more government ministers like how to think about, and to each of them we always say, let's take you out somewhere and let's go and have a look at whatever particular agenda it is that you're interested in. We had, we get a lot of interest on that. We're negotiating with someone already about going to do that. The other thing I would say as well, not just ministers, but also MPs and councillors. Certainly there are a number of MPs and councillors I know who hold their surgeries in libraries. Again, that's something we're really keen to encourage, because I think you're absolutely right. The more they're in there and they see what goes on there and the people that are in, I think the better it is. So fully support that, and please do target your MPs and councillors and get to do surgeries and things in there. Just in terms of voluntary libraries, and I have been to various bits of York, but I'm very happy to come to North Yorkshire, so I should add you to my list of places to come and visit. In terms of voluntary libraries, so when we go out and talk to local authority chief execs and to portfolio holders, and I did a session a few weeks back that the LGA ran for a whole range of library portfolio holders. We always touch on voluntary libraries, because they always want volunteer libraries, because they want to know about it, because as Paul said, they see that other people are doing it and want to know more. We are very clear about the sort of pros and cons of those and the things that they need to think about in deciding to go down that route. We do say that where you have effectively full-time paid staff, and you have volunteers that come in and work alongside them. As I've had it up, as we talked about in our workshop this morning, you know, to run IT classes or help people get online or whatever, or help with some reading challenge or something. You know, that can be really, really valuable, and volunteers can play a hugely valuable role in that. We say in some circumstances it may be appropriate, you know, if that's the only solution that's available to you, to think about actually putting a library into community managed hands. But you know, we are very clear that if the local authority does that, you know, there is still an onus on them to make sure that community has all the support it needs to make that library run, whether that's book stock, whether it's access to the library management system, whether it's access to, you know, the computers that are there, or you know, paid staff again, you know, to come around and talk to. You know, the sort of the model of a local authority is cutting adrift of community library and saying, "Where you go, we'll have nothing more to do with you." You know, we think is unacceptable. I've publicly said it's unacceptable to, you know, far more than one person in many public platforms. So you know, if the local authority does want to make community run library, it should be being supported in some of the ways that I outlined. And there are some examples of that in the country, which, you know, again, may not feel where anybody wanted to start, but now they're in that position. Actually, you know, they are making a real success of it, and you know, all credit to them. You know, I'm not going to say the ideal solution, but you know, where it does work and works well, it can be made to work. But that cut adrift model, no, sorry, not acceptable.
Do we have an example of where it worked well? I don't know if it could be an example. Exactly. Where it works well, and what is that leads you to say that it works well? Because I don't know where it works.
Okay, so the one I'd probably cite would be Harbury in Warwickshire. Would be one example. And you know, go through more. The guidance I talked about earlier, sort of the guidance for voluntary run libraries, you know, we'll be looking to use that as opportunities to pull out case studies. Why does that one work well? I think because the local authority is, as I say, is still really, really supportive of it. There's a few community run libraries, I'm doing from memory in Warwickshire. And the local authority have people who are appointed as being, you know, the people who provide that interface and that support with them. And you know, from what we saw, they did that very well. You know, the community has got a very clear agreement, I think, as well with the local authority about what they are expected to do, and you know what they're not expected to do. So I think that's a very clear sort of arrangement between the two.
Yeah, can I just say, just come back as well on that question. If that question, as I heard the inference, so you think the task force is there just promoting voluntary libraries as a new solution? It isn't. Okay, I'll be as blunt as that. We are absolutely not doing that. And actually, what I'd love to see is a thriving, you know, what's a success look like for me? It'd be thriving libraries, which is still all the trusted places and people can get the knowledge and potential realisation that they want, that offered other service to be really part of their community and have top-class professional staff to do those. Okay? I absolutely understand that, and as Kathy said, but there are in my libraries again, a role for volunteers to help that, because it's part of that community and they feel engaged in that community. So I really, but it is our job, you know, as a task force to say, as Kathy said, these things are what are going on and these are the pros and cons. The other thing that we're very cognizant of, however, is that some of these things have been in existence for such a short period of time, because we're open, that actually even then it is very difficult to know, because whilst it might be working now, it might not be sustainable in 5 years' time. Ditto, it might not be working very well now because it hasn't really got on its feet, but in 5 years' time, it might be absolutely fantastic. So we've also got to be careful about whether we've got enough evidence base to you know, surmise on these things. But if it's about, you know, how do you deal with tax implications, for example, whether something's legal or not legal to do, then those types of things are black and white, and we can advise on that.
I think that there.
I've got three, and then I think we're going to be out of time.
Yes, I think these will have to be the finals.
John, lady here, and the gentleman down the front. Well, can we take the lady at the back who hasn't spoken before?
Yes, that was the last one.
Yeah.
And if you can give a priority for the task force, that would be lovely.
And also to be really great, because when I'm dressed like this, I need to be on the train at least in 1 minute past 4. So when you do see me get out the door, that would be the reason why.
We've talked about libraries in the abstract. Yeah. So we've talked about libraries in the abstract. In this morning's discussion, there was talk following out. And I'd like to see the task force express very strong determination to see, well, whatever it is, we've talked about standards and so on. I know that's not a good bill, but certainly quality staff, not just professional librarians, but trained staff working with commercial librarians. So a good training budget. I'd like to see proper quality book funds that maintain a fresh, current, and relevant stock. I'd like to see the e-content that Kathy mentioned, access to e-resources, and access to learning content. I mean, libraries give access to the internet, and we're past the day when you can have library-specific content. You just go on to the web and things there. But there is a need, I think, to create resources, MOOCs, and so on, that are learning content that is delivered. So there's a learning strategy, but not just that they're about learning, but they actually can be to deliver learning opportunities to people according to current agendas. And alongside all that, proper capacity, whatever form it comes, for programs. We very often, Arts Council will provide money for programs and activities, events. We mentioned summer reading time. Is there anything else happening in the world that could be run alongside the summer reading time? Learning challenges, IT challenges. There are lots of things like to do. We talk about the abstract, but I'd like to see some sort of energy put behind them in the way that they're really able to spill up the energy behind the summer reading challenge. And for goodness sake, now they've got Wi-Fi, then they start modernising it. Private, you don't want it beyond. But yeah, that's sort of, if you look at the content of what the libraries are providing and doing.
Yeah, I mean, the answer is yes, they're very balanced.
I just wanted to see like in the community, really talking about staff savings, we still want the councils to provide and sort of their branches. So really it's a way of what you actually get paid in your job, but can't make much savings out of and staff, to be quite honest. I decided to draw your attention to a cartoon I saw recently in a newspaper. There was a fat man in the middle of the boat, and a skinny man perched on the end, and the fat man says, "Get out of the boat, it's too heavy."
I mean, sorry, there is a really important underlying point to that. If you look at the marginal costs of shutting libraries and the size of the arts, half the time you really have to question what the cost would be. That's why for me, it's about how do you make them much more active in the rest of the year and getting value into libraries as opposed to the marginal cost out of the library. So how do you go with that?
And some of the guidance I talked about getting some best practice examples and that. One of the things we want to make very clear is what savings do people really make as opposed to what did they think they make? Because I many people use it to say actually we didn't make some savings as we thought we were going to do.
I just want to say, because we talked about the lack of data, and I was going to say to task force, would it be an idea to contact the library authorities, you said?
Yeah.
We just got a basic survey, basic writing survey, have you got public libraries, are they run by volunteers, all this? I'm sure you can come up with 6 questions and you get some good feedback on that. Because I have no idea how many libraries are run by volunteers, how many are privatised and all this, and how many are closing. And if we have next year, have some stats for us so we can discuss those. So again, you can come again for the third year, you can see how the libraries have gone down or up or what happened.
Yeah, we've already done that.
You must
So we did a survey at libraries 4 or 5 months ago, maybe I can't remember now. And we're pulling together that data and looking at Julie's been doing some mapping. How can we best present it to make it available to people? So it's a start of if you give your name to Julia at the end, we can talk about what we've done so far. So, but we're looking to try and get that into public domain as soon as possible and keep it today. The only thing I would just mention of the comment, John, is on the learning stuff and around MOOCs, and I just pay credit to SCL who've done their launch of their learning offer the other week. They've done an awful lot of work, including sort of piloting some MOOCs, and also looking at things like How do we extend that learning to some new areas? So, for example, things like code clubs with children, for example, and a lot of that done in partnership with other organisations. So it's not just library staff who have been expected to deliver stuff.
Okay. Was that just that one question from the? Oh, sorry, at the back. And then I think we'll have to call it to a close. You have the final question.
My view is that we should be invested in people, because you will save money on libraries if you can teach kids to read at an early age. There was a report out recently about reading levels in Britain, and it was abysmal, and it was crying shame, and that's why people end up with it. Because it's a lot of money. We should be using that money in the libraries. That's one point. Another point is you said things that are outsourced. That's okay, as long as it doesn't turn out to be more work to the librarian because what's being outsourced. The thing is, in Liverpool, they've just outsourced a particular library to the NHS, to Mercycare. So, what will happen there? There won't be less work for librarians because there'll be less of a library. And we don't know how much of a library that will be. Nobody knows yet. There's starts with alterations, and we don't know how much of a library there will be. When you're looking at successes in libraries, in Liverpool there was a library that was went to community library in 2010, and it's praised as being an example of something that worked. It was open 6 days a week. Those hours have been reduced. It was the data they used to say it was a good library. It is a good community library. It's not brilliant. If it was taken into account in the libraries that were at risk, it would be at the bottom. Because they used data in terms of usage, not in number of people who use the library. That was well down. One other thing, I'm sort of speaking through this, one other thing very briefly. I'm wheelchair user. In library in Liverpool, when they talked about closing libraries that were at risk, which we thought they said it'd be okay because how we're going to do it, there'll be another library just 2 miles away. So we asked, is that how the crow flies? Well, we're not crows. And a library user, it takes me a long time to get anywhere just on decent pavements, in decent weather. You will isolate people, like if you close, if you outsource, if you close local libraries. My plea to you would be defend local libraries. Full stop.
Okay, thank you. Perhaps George has to give a final word and then Paul can get off to his struggling action.
I mean, it's a really interesting point talking back to sort of Alan's question on my concept of outsourcing, investing in people. The whole reason, just using examples, the whole reason I've gone down to that next step is because we actually want to make sure we're investing in prevention, because that's what the body is dedicated to, the full form of what we do about prevention, both from health and from the local government does, in order to reduce demand on the state going forward, as well as being what is right for the well-being of the people of Northamptonshire. So I concur with that point. Sometimes, however, check the Liverpool one. I never want to comment on people because often when I've talked and sit with the chief executive, I go, right, that's what you actually mean as opposed to what people are saying you mean. Because it does mean you're investing in an asset, which includes the people as well as the building. So the point was made as well, actually, about things like book stock. I have a simple philosophy, if you think about a library as a shop, and that isn't what I'm thinking about, But if you basically don't have an offer in them because you've taken the books away, you don't have something unique such as the technology things that you can't get anywhere else. And by the way, the hours get shorter and shorter and you're not quite sure when they are, then miraculously you've already set a self-fulfilling prophecy, haven't you? Because it never won't come. And I think, you know, again, the fact is, what the task force is trying to say, and this is what I'm stressing on, is there are places who are doing all the opposites of that. And so how can they do it with the same austerity and sometimes more austerity on them than others? And our role is to try and get everybody to understand what good looks like and to adopt it before, I mean, all the other massive pressures on them, they take the wrong decision for the sustainability of libraries in their area and therefore in England. And that is absolutely, I say the hard part is what we are trying to get people in decision-making positions to understand. So, you know, that's the whole raison d'etre as far as I see it, from my role as chair of the task force.
Keep going. That's fine. Well, it's now tea time, and I would like to, on your behalf, thank very much Paul and Kathy for sitting in the hot seat and for explaining to us what the task force is about, what it hopes to achieve, and how it hopes to get there. I know that there'll be numerous views about their future, but I know that we all have one thing at heart, and that is that we want a bloody good library service for the people of this country. But can we just show our appreciation to Paul? Tea's in the Europe room where you've shot. And it's half an hour, is it? I think it's half an hour, yes. Half an hour back for our entertainment.